you. For my they're fine verbally or just raise your actual hand or the Zoom hand, but I'm not gonna look at the chat. Okay. Can you hear me okay? What does the transition to the private equity model looks like? It probably looks like a private equity firm, which is just an entity that in most instances is like investing in different types of ventures and like different types of like entrepreneurship, different types of organizations. They're going to, in most instances, they're specialized in law, the ones that we're talking about, and they come into these firms, they buy the firm, and then they employ the previously like the nominated associates and the rest of the lawyers within the firm. We think it is quite clear that in most instances, they would have decisions regarding where the firm goes in the future. And although lawyers still have a significant degree of autonomy in terms of which cases they take to the same extent that they do right now, obviously it is not absolute. We think that is going to remain. I want to preempt one specific thing, which is on the specific interests that this corporation has, because I think opposition can run a very reasonable case about how like more interests are going to be meddled in the law. The first thing that I want to note is that this is probably better than Johnson, Mike, and three just white dudes from Harvard having their interests just being being pushed. I still don't understand why the fact that you're a lawyer would make you like significantly moral and just comparatively better. I think that in the vast majority of instances, the interests of the people at the top are still going to direct the course of this firm. So it is unclear why it would be way worse for it to just be different people at the top. Obviously, we're going to claim that these people have a lot more checks and balances, namely because now the lawyers themselves have a lot more power to push back. Because previously, in many instances, because the structures of these firms are quite social, right? Where it's like you got hired by this lawyer because you knew his uncle or because you studied in the same university. It is very hard for you to happen. But the perception that you have as a lawyer now is that you are actually going to counterbalance your employer whenever it is necessary. So I think there are more incentives for individuals within the institution to do that. The other thing that I would note is obviously like the people within the board still have some fiduciary duties, right? And it obviously means that they can still talk to why this particular firm was founded to begin with. And so it is unlikely that this firm would have invested in a firm that they are going to massively change. I think they're probably just going to change some degrees of management and improve its efficiencies. The first thing that I'm going to claim is that one big problem in the lawyering world is that the harder these individuals work, the less likely it becomes that they practice law. And in most instances, they just become managers of these firms, which is very, very bad, both for the justice system and for the law firm itself. The first thing that I would note is the narrative behind it in most instances is that the best thing you can achieve within this world is becoming like an owner of a firm, right? So in most instances, your biggest goal is not the cases that you take, the particular group that you're helping, or the particular ways in which you behave within your firm, but it is opening a firm or becoming a partner yourself. Like you've seen this in shows, or like as an average regional voter, you know that like the best thing you can get is like being ascended to be one of the partners of the firm. And the problem with this is threefold. The first is you obviously have the best lawyers no longer practicing, which means that whenever you have people actually going to court or fighting over contracts, fighting in many instances over wills, it is a lot less likely that you have the best interpretations of the law, which I think is obviously marginal. I don't think this is like a huge issue, but I don't think the emotion changes the world either. I just think it is marginally worse when you have these lawyers out of the game. I think we fundamentally changed that when they now have incentives to just focus on taking particular cases, because the thing that can change is their salary, but that salary is based on their performance, on taking more cases, being better at them, as opposed to you get to the position where you're a partner and you no longer have to do shit. That is why in many instances, the partners of these firms are 70-year-olds who are disconnected with new interpretations of the law, and in many instances do not understand the new law students that are coming in the firm, and there is a big disconnect. Again, not the biggest impact in the world, but I think that for the scope of this motion, this is quite significant. I think the second issue with this is that in many instances, like the law world becomes very, very much inaccessible to certain groups, and it becomes quite unmeritocratic. In most instances, what this looks like is you're hiring people because of networks and because of what university they came to. Obviously, the private equity firm doesn't give a shit about this, because all they care about is about making a profit and just furthering the particular cause that they care for. And so what ends up happening is you're employing individuals that are most capable, as opposed to individuals that come from a particular school, that come from a particular social background. Both the positions are going to say that this is not the case, just because like if you're hiring fucking idiots, then you're not making money, and partners probably don't have that incentive. But the thing is, this doesn't really matter whenever all firms agree to do the same, i.e. in New York City, all firms just do the same, where they just hire from a couple of universities, and as long as the lawyers are good enough, they don't have to hire the best lawyers, the ones that have the best grades in university, the ones that have a particular calling to the law. That is what we fundamentally solve on our side of the house, because you have structural incentives to do this. You don't just hire the people that are good enough, you hire the best, and I think that is way better. Closing up.
So you've asserted that managing partners are out of touch and old, but that it's a harm that they don't practice. Which one is it?
Brother in Christ, there are different types of managers. In some instances, okay, if there is a very old guy that is bad, on our side, he wouldn't practice either, because he would be fired for not being good. On your side of the house, they can stay in power just because they have the partnership position, and they can continue practicing. Like obviously, in most instances, the point is, no matter what it is, on our side of the house, you get to define which, like you just keep the best homies, and I think that's good. The thing that I will note here is, irrespective of whether at the end of the round you think that one model is better than the other, this debate is not about that. It is about a certain subset of these firms transitioning. And so what we're going to claim is that the fact that there are both types of ownership models is a good thing in itself. Why? Because I think these firms in most instances are a lot more risk averse. Because think about it, panel. In the vast majority of instances, we're not talking about like Spectre Lit and the biggest like firms in the world, right? It's smaller firms that are self-funding in the developing world. And in those instances, that means that the case that opening opposition or closing might talk about, where it's like, I built a firm because I had this particular calling for refugees or for a very vulnerable group, doesn't actually materialize. It is very unlikely that I actually open a firm or take on cases for a very niche group, because it is not profitable yet. It will only become profitable when we significantly create a market where like you can actually make it profitable, where you have enough investment, etc. And so I think in the vast majority of instances, the types of cases that these private equity firms, which are going to be a minority, but we support them taking on some spaces, are a lot more likely to be risk averse. They are more likely to take that minority case. They are more likely to take that case that it's unlikely that they win, but if they are to win, it's going to give them a lot of money. They are a lot more likely to take those risks because they are cross-subsidizing from their other investments. And I think that in this world, it is better that you have a subset of particular firms that you can go to whenever your case is not immediately apparently good. This is just intuitively good for justice, right? Because if you only get access to the best justice whenever your case is likely to win, then it is just a system of confirmation where justice isn't actually changing any paradigms. More risk aversion is a world where you can actually challenge the establishment, get representation for the most vulnerable, and it only happens on our side where people with resources are investing as opposed to lawyers who are trying to make a living. For those reasons, we're proud to propose.
Yeah, we thank the speaker for the speech, and to continue, very proud to call leader of opposition. Woo-hoo.
Just to make sure, am I clearly audible?
Yeah.
Two cases from opening a position in this debate, where we significantly improve the quality of law services people get, and why we significantly improve the quality of life of lawyers. Before, a couple of points of framing. A, we think that you're not just buying specific firms, it's likely that you're making much bigger firms, because when you're incentivized to build maximal profit, merging firms and reducing competition is a massive advantage. And if you have less competition, you can push up prices, you're much better off. As they say, private equity firms have much deeper pockets. They can buy multiple firms. And second, one of the reasons we have so many firms is, as they agree with us, there is prestige to being your own partner, to setting out on your own and founding your own firm. And there is a limited number of people who can be in a managing partnership because it becomes unwieldy with too many people. With this point, we think it's likely we're getting a much more concentrated market with much bigger firms. We think, secondly, it's likely that if we support the increase of those firms, they will dominate certain areas of the market. Because they have much more money, they are much more capable of advertising. They are much more capable of getting themselves known by being on TV, by being on billboards, which means it's more likely that when people need lawyers, they will go to them. Note, very, very large firms are not in this debate to a significant extent on either house because they have in-house lawyers, right? Google has their own lawyers. And B, they only work, as they told us, with the very largest firms in New York. They are not relevant to most lawyers and most law firms and to most law that is happening. No, thank you. Let's get into our main argument about the quality of lawyer services. Let us start with the question of more competition, because we think, as we've told you, and I think open government agrees with us to a large extent, these are going to be much larger firms that are going to be buying multiple firms and not many small partnerships as we have today, because as they told you, they want them to be less risk averse by being bigger and having more money. We think at that point, A, you just have less competition to offer good prices and good services to people, because you don't care about the individual client to nearly the same extent, because you have so many clients that you're just better off getting only the most profitable ones and not making as much effort for the marginal one. That means you are getting less competition and worse conditions for clients, but also means there is less incentive for you to be well managed because there is less competition, which means hiring worse lawyers and being worse at informing law is going to cost you less because you're not going to be successful. Note a piece of integrated rebuttal. If the lawyers not from Harvard are better than the lawyers from Harvard, no thank you, and in chapters. If the lawyers not from Harvard are much better than lawyers from Harvard, they can start their own partnership in this world and succeed and be better than the partnerships existing. And because they will win cases, they will gain prestige and become successful. On the comparative, when these firms hire through HR firms, etc., what does HR firms want to show is that they have hired a candidate that should be good, right? They don't want to be blamed for making a mistake. So they always prefer to take the Harvard candidate over the non-Harvard candidate because nobody will blame them for making a mistake that way. On the comparative, if they take the non-Harvard candidate and he's bad and he flunks a major case and he's not a useful hire, they will take flack for hiring the less qualified candidate, and therefore they are much less likely to do so. So we think we flip this outcome from opening opposition. A second reason why we're going to get better quality of law services is because we're going to have better management. Look what opening opposition of government is telling you. It's telling you the most experienced and best lawyers are no longer going to be managers. But these are exactly the people who are going to be managers. Because what does it mean to manage a law firm? It means to assign the correct lawyers to the correct cases. It means to understand what to do about cases to decide whether you should settle or whether you should continue. It means making the big decisions for cases when people come up to you and need to make a decision. At which point, we need this to be the best lawyers because you need to be able to do it quickly. You need to be able to quickly evaluate whether the case and what is the correct decision. You need to be able to quickly about which lawyer would be good at this case and which lawyer would not be as good at this case. If you're not a great lawyer yourself, it's impossible for you to do so. And yes, we think it's better for great lawyers to do this because they have much more impact than if they work a single case. They influence a lot of cases on the firm rather than one case. So it's better for great lawyers to be there compared to them being in another place. We think on a third level, they're just going to be much more able to listen and tailor themselves to people. Look, when you're a small law firm and you're in control of yourself, you're not bounded by corporate guidelines, and you have massive incentive to get every client. That means that when somebody wants a case that is not a standard case for your law firm, you're much more likely to make an effort to take him in. When somebody has a weird divorce case that requires some weird shenanigans to make an effort and to pass this case from different states, you're more likely to take it compared to the comparative, right? And finally, we think you're just more in control. So you're more able to tailor it rather than saying, look, nothing we can do. This is the corporate policy set up in some city 1,000 miles away, nothing we can do about it. But second, we think it means more pro bono at that level. Look, because when lawyers are in a partnership, they're not as driven by profit. They're more driven by prestige, as open government agrees with us. There's a lot of prestige in doing pro bono work, in helping people, in looking good and kind, and showing your partnership does good in the world. There is no money in it, at which point private equity won't get it, and we're helping the poorest people by not giving them good services. Before I continue to our second case about quality of lawyers, closing governments.
Opening.
Sure, opening.
The whole thing about merging makes no sense. On our side of the house, you can afford to not merge. If you think it is profitable, that is why so many firms merge in the status quo, destroying competition because they are smaller, they have less money, and therefore have to merge. That is the status quo that you think is.
Thank you. Look, we are telling you that when you are a partnership and have an incentive to start your own firm because you want to become a partner, you have an incentive to strike out. We are telling you the size of a partnership can be limited because you are not a private company that can raise massive amounts of funds in the public markets or from banks. You are limited by the number of partners you have, and therefore you're going to split eventually. We're telling you that this creates prestige to starting your own firm. On the comparative, these companies have massive amounts of money, and because it's more profitable to merge and to become a big monopolistic company that is very efficient, they're going to do so, hurting competition, hurting everybody else, and lining their own pockets. We prefer everybody else to themselves. Look, let's talk about quality of life for lawyers, because it's important to emphasize lawyers who want this style of life, lawyers who don't want to be in charge of their own destiny, who want to have less agency, can already get it, right? They can opt out by working for the government, by being just associates and not becoming partners, by working for large corporations, such as being Facebook's in-house lawyer or Walmart's in-house lawyer. There's lots of just being a person for hire jobs for lawyers. There are much fewer places where you can determine your agency, where you have complete control of your own life, when you can have non-standard work hours, and yes, where you can focus on the things you care about, even if they're not maximizing profit. If that means doing work for refugees, because we know some partnerships focus on that. Yes, it's not as profitable, but they want to do so. If it means focusing on specific things like helping laws against gender discrimination and other things, you have much more capacity to do so. But finally, we think you're just as a lawyer, feel much more empowered and much more normalized to go out and strike on your own and try your luck to actually see what you can achieve and maximize your life outcomes. waiting at the point in which opening government significantly reduces your ability to choose so, and all governments have significantly reduces your ability to choose so, and makes it much harder for you to compete in such a market, they're significantly harming the quality of life of employers because they are limiting one option when the other option already exists to a large extent. At which point, I think we either show you A, much better law services to the general public, and B, much better life for lawyers, we call on you to oppose.
We thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call Deputy Prime Minister.
はい。Am I audible?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Perfect. I just want to be very clear about what the comparative is from the get-go. I genuinely don't think what O talks about materializes in majority of the cases, because private equity firms have a multiplicity of incentives and multiplicity of things that they actually invest in right now. It's genuinely unclear as to why they want to make like mass amount of like massive law firms, because they have like pools of money in multiplicity of things, right? Because private equity firms have an incentive like not spread all of their risks in one thing, but two, like you have a multiplicity of private investment firms. So I just don't know why, if it's so profitable for one to go and actually invest in a law firm, why other private equity firms won't come up and buy other firms as well, creating an inherent system of competition, meaning there's going to be a diversity of firms that exist anyway. Firstly, I'll engage with O, and secondly, I'll go off to talk about the most important impacts that Manuel highlighted. The first thing I want to note is that I just want to go through the mechanisms that or highlighted about why this like massive diffusion of massive firms are going to come up, right? The incentive they give here is very simple. That is to say that you have an incentive to go and buy up these firms more and more and make a transition, because you can go and increase the prices of these firms, right? The first thing I want to note here is that like some of the firms that they're talking about, the most exclusive and most prestigious of the firms, are massively expensive anyway. I genuinely don't think why, I don't really care, even if they go and increase their prices more, because they're not accessible to majority of the normal people in the status quo, right? It's like really rich firms aren't really accessible for the people who actually need to access legal support. They aren't really accessible for the common person. So it's unclear as to why, even if they're correct, it's a really important impact. But the second thing I want to note is that if they're correct, it's unclear as to why it's going to happen in like the firms that are more like firms which are more on the ground, right? More firms which aren't so prestigious, which are firms which are like not the most prestigious and most expensive firms in status quo, right? Because the intuition and logic they give is that it's so profitable because they're making so much more money. It's unclear as to why those firms on the ground who aren't the most prestigious have that same incentive and have that same profit structure. So I don't know why the legal support firms that provide pro bono or provide like very niche things like refugee support, or provide things like maybe women who are going through a divorce, who are going against like things like sexual abusive partners, those are massively profitable. So I don't know why private equity firms will go and take those up if the logic of O is correct. But the second thing they say is that but the quality will reduce if these like large firms actually go and get into the first place, right? But let's use their logic. If you are able to hire more lawyers because your firm is bigger and you have more money, I don't know why the quality reduces, because you have the ability to actually go and hire more competitive lawyers right now without using the same biases and same inherent like echo chambers and like the revolving door that Manuel talked about, right? Because the problem right now in the most prestigious firms is you have a revolving door where majority of the lawyers who do the hiring process, the majority of the lawyers who like actually make decisions about hiring in the first place, either do it based on networks that exist, which are completely arbitrary, which are like based on like your white man's white son who went to Harvard gets hired because he's smart and he's your friend, or you hire from the same institution. That incentive to some degree doesn't exist in private equity firms, right? Because you don't have that same revolving door, because the hiring decisions now won't be made by the associates. They will be made by the board the private equity firm most likely takes up, and they have like multiple CSR like responsibilities as well, right? Because this is this is like another incentive that exists for them, right? So the comparative is maybe it's not right now. Maybe it's not a massive increase in the hiring process, but it's a marginal increase, which is still important, right? Because it's a trickle down effect. If you hire one black lawyer, that is still valuable because because you are able to change to some degree, change the culture that exists in the law firm, right? Because you like that person is going to go up the rung. They're going to become like an important lawyer who has gotten good cases. The ability to change the culture of the firm from the inside, even hiring one person that is like from like one of these backgrounds is important, right? But the second thing then they say is that, but like right now, the reason why most law firms actually go and help people out is because they care about prestige. I just genuinely don't think this is true. The most prestigious lawyers don't get prestige by doing pro bono. They get prestige by doing a case for Johnny Depp, or like one of those richest people who gets the most amount of media attention, who gets the most amount of like clout when they go and deal with this divorce case. It's genuinely not true that they go and like work in like a district court in like a fucking like a rural community and help them and they get prestige. Like that's literally not how prestige systems work. What would be prestigious is that like on the comparative, when you have more lawyers that are being hired in some of these firms because you have more, like bigger processes using their own logic, that is when you're likely to get some amount of diffusion with regards to taking cases which are more likely to support people, right? The final thing I want to note here is with regards to responsiveness, with regards to the transition that happens. I think there's a key problem in a lot of law firms, especially which are based on associates who are highly who've been working as an associate for 70 years. It's incredibly hard when you transition as a company to the next shareholder. The problem here is very simple. The way the next associate is hired is completely arbitrary. You use things like your own biases. You use things like your own unconscious biases to actually go and hire the person who was most friendliest to you, the person you might think resembles you the best when you're hiring that associate. Sure. I genuinely don't think these are good metrics to actually change the culture of law firms, because in the comparative, the private equity firm has the ability to use meritocracy at a better metric, not the person who was the best friend of yours who bought you more coffee or fucking donut when you were like doing like your like classification work, right? That means that on our side we get more comparative like meritocracy when you transition into the other people who are going to be in charge of the company and these decision making. Before I go on to like where our impacts, I'll take you.
Do law firms have a profit incentive?
Yeah, no, of course they do, but like I think it's like a spectrum, right? Like the reality is that like in some cases, some law firms don't care about profit as much. They just want to like float, like maybe things like refugee support. I genuinely don't think that those things are really going to like change to a large degree. We're just talking specifically about like massive firms that are going to be taken up by private equity. But even if those smaller firms are going to be taken up, I think it's a good thing, because if companies have like private equity firms have CSR motivations, they want to improve their like portfolio, they want to show the public that they're doing something good, they want to show their investors that they're doing something good, then they will go and invest in the refugee support firm. And that is a good thing now, because they'll have more money to actually go and do cases. They'll have more money to actually go and do things like pro bono support for those people. You only get that in our sense when you have that investment going in, right? At the end of the day, what we prove is very simple. I think this debate happens in the margins. I don't think the massive structural change actually happens in law firms, because to be honest, we'll still have smaller firms on our side. We'll still have firms that are bought by private equity. All we say is two very simple things. One, to a large degree, the structures of meritocracy will actually change now, because you understand that private equity firms have a different structure, even though it's marginal with regards to things like hiring, which can change to be law firms actually interact, mean the quality of legal advice is going to be better, and the people that are going to be hired are going to be better. We give better access and resources to smaller firms as well that actually help people on the ground. All of these reasons, OG.
We thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call Deputy Leader of Opposition. Woo.
Just making sure I'm audible. Good. I prefer POI on chat. Just tell me when you want in chat and I will take you when I'm ready. First about quality of services, then about the quality of life for the attorney. Look, let's start with what we heard from OG, because I think that the two main things that we get from OG is, first, we're getting worse quality of services because the management stopped practicing. Second thing that we get from them is that we hire bad attorneys because we are based on connection. First, about the management. Look, I just think it's actually a lie. Those attorneys who are becoming partners wants to have great legacies and to win those great and amazing cases that no one else is able to win, so they're still practicing. They want to increase the prestige of their own firm, meaning that they are practicing there. We think that everyone knows that they have this expertise, so they're only one who can actually win those cases, meaning that they are practicing there. We think that they're getting more money if they're the lawyers who are being there. Yes, all of the partners get some money, but they will probably get more if they're actually the one practicing there. All of that means that those great expertise or in the management are still practicing, just don't think that this is on the debate. Second thing is about that we are people based on connection. Look, I think that at the worst case scenario, this is symmetrical. The companies are also doing it based on connection. They are also probably management from Harvard or other Ivy Leagues. We think that actually they're hiring worse people. Why? Because we think that compared to lawyers who know that people from other less well-known universities are able to be good, those companies never practice law. So all of they see is from medias, from TV shows. They think that they know how a good lawyer look like, from which university he should be like. They're only hiring people from their meaning. We think that they're actually going to hire worse people. But we actually think that those traditional lawyer firms hire good people. First, they want the best lawyers because they want to win cases. They want people to come to there. This is giving them a huge incentive to actually get this. And secondly, they don't want the bad press of being the only law firm that never hire people from poverty places. We think that this is just doesn't happen in the. The last thing that they give you is that look, companies are going to invest in those refugees or green stuff to wash the blame on them. First, we think that most of them will just want to block and prevent those lawyer firms to sue them because they are the firm who are doing the bad stuff. The medicine companies are doing pollution. The pollution companies are also doing pollution, so they just don't want to invest in. But secondly, they have obligation for the people who invest money in them. They need to show that the only cases that they are taking create money for those own companies, meaning it's extremely unlikely they're going to do this pro bono stuff, extremely unlikely they're going to do those washing sues for them. We just think that in that case, OG doesn't have anything in the quality of services. But let's get more to what my partner gave you. Because look, my partner gave you several different ways why we are improving the quality of services. First, it tells you that we are getting way more competition because now internally, every lawyer has huge incentive to excel there because they want to be part of, to get to the position that they can become a partner. That means that anyone who hire a lawyer there just get better lawyers that work harder, that are able to get justice faster for them, that are more well-trained, meaning they are getting what they need. No, please write in chat. They're getting what they actually need. Secondly, it tells you that we just now have less competition because we're getting more and more firms merging, meaning they're able to push prices, able to be the only one who advertise there. It's prevent from other lawyers, reduce highly the incentive of lawyers to create those new firms to actually compete. We get an attack from OG that, look, but there are several private companies, so they're going to buy, we're going to have several people, companies who buy those law firms. Yes, but this is a question of extent. If instead of 100 law firms, we have 5 because all of those we merge 20 law firms, this still reduces drastically the competition. And first, that means that people have hard time to afford those lawyers, meaning less people are actually able to get the justice they need. And secondly, as I already said, ability for them to get the time to actually get this justice. I mean that beside that, which is still standing, my partner explained to why we have better management, because lawyers to actually understand what is happening and what is needed is actually happening there, not some outsourcing of management that's happening. This means better training for lawyers, again, trickle down to people who hire them, but also faster justice because people actually hire the people that they need, people are trained more, people are actually able to get the skills that they need. That affect everyone who actually hire those lawyers. This reduce the amount of time that it takes us to get this justice and reduce the injustice from waiting years on years for lawyers to settle down on fee. Lastly, my partner explained to that there are just services that we want to get. First, he explained to that we just don't have, we'll have way less pro bono cases because those lawyers have less incentive to do it because now they only care about the monetary gain they're going to get, that they're less ability to say, I want to do something good in the world. I want to be the first one who fight this cigarette company because this is not something that as the company who bought me has huge incentive for me to do. We think that all of that means that regular people don't get those stuff, regular people don't get those cases. We think this by itself creates huge impact in this debate. First, as I already said, the time for justice is way longer. People just left harmed without the ability to get compensation that they need, without the ability to get the money or the services they need. Secondly, the fact that the prices of hiring is increasing means that some people won't even sue without getting the justice that they need. Lastly, I already said it. Look, we think this quality is way more important than anything that we will hear about the quality of life of law. first, we think it should affect way more people that create larger impact there. Secondly, the delta that we get for people is much higher. Yes, maybe the level are going to be a bit worse or a bit better, but if those people who are suing and want to have ability to sue are just getting nothing out of them. I think, you know what, before I continue, I will take closing.
So don't private equity firms have a lot of experience helping small companies develop into bigger ones and therefore inspire more competition on the market?
No, I think at best some and some. Secondly, I don't think that they have incentive to help those small lawyer firms that probably want to maximize their profit, meaning they don't really care if you're doing those pro bono cases, doing those good charity cases. They only care if you're getting more and more money. Lastly, I just think that even if they know how to make small companies better, they know in their specific type and specific sector, meaning those drug companies don't know how to be a good lawyer or make a law firm better. They just know how to make a better drug companies, meaning that doesn't help them this quality. We think that means you're just massively harming the quality of service for the people. Lastly, about the quality of life. I think that the ability of lawyers to get to other companies, if, as my partner told you, mean that the harm that is going to happen to their life is something avoidable for them if they prefer to do. We think that on our side, they have better management, which improve their life. They now have influence on those pro bono cases, have ability to influence the way that their office look like, have ability to improve their daily life. This means that they also improve the quality of life, but as I already said, it's just way less important than the service that everyone gets and the effect of the majority of the population. We call you to oppose.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech and happy to call member of government. Also, I think this is the time to pause the recording. And very proud to call member of opposition.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let me just get my timer up. Okay, I'll take a POI around 5 minutes. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1, go. I think the problem in this debate is that people are really ungranular about what PE firms actually do and how the profit-seeking behavior of private equity firms are different and not symmetrical from the profit-seeking behavior of lawyers in debate. I think what's brought from our opening opposition is several things. They tell us firstly that the profit incentives go away, but I think this is where we're going to explain why we're breaking the symmetry. And secondly, they tell us, oh, lawyers are kind and that's why they do pro bono work. But I think we can be much more structural about this reasoning. I think it's the very specific way of how private equity firms structure previous partner relationships within these firms and how these changes the incentives of lawyers to pursue pro bono work beyond some nebulous idea of them being kind, which I'll explain. So first, to clarify then, how do private equity firms work? And this is going to coincide well with government. So I think mainly how private equity firms work is they take a collection of shareholder money and the private equity firm determines how to invest that shareholder money, typically by investing and buying out, usually using a lot of debt to buy out certain companies and then to grow and manage those companies before selling that company for a large chunk of profit, which they then return to shareholders. And that's typically how private equity firm works. So what this means is that typically private equity firms try to do a short horizon, so typically 3 to 5 years, in order to try and grow that firm somewhat and then be able to sell it quickly so that they can then reinvest that money that they've sold in order to pay back the debt, in order to buy even more companies in the first place. So that's why they often have that very, very like sort of short time horizon. What this also means is that oftentimes private equity firms have to pursue a very aggressive growth strategy. This is because they need to compete against other private equity firms to convince shareholders to give them their money in the first place, which means that they oftentimes have to make grand promises to shareholders that they will get like a 10% profit. Notice that portfolio managers who run these private equity firms have to like agree to those deals in order to be able to get their fee in the first place. So in order to get the fee of like 2% of like all profits or all the final transaction, they have to deliver to shareholders that return that they promise. This means private equity firms tend to overpromise on how much they can deliver. They're often very ambitious targets to try and generate enough money to actually get a fund in order to buy a firm in the first place. Notice secondly, though, they often have to pursue aggressive growth and profit-making strategies because they often use a lot of debt to buy out these firms in the first place. Notice oftentimes these firms are massive, but also debt is often untaxed, which means that firms take out a lot of debt in order to leverage and do a leveraged buyout of a firm. Oftentimes this debt comes alongside high interest rates, oftentimes because it's quite risky be buying out a firm. And so this interest rate may be 3 to 5%. So oftentimes these firms need to yield enough profit to be able to pay the interest rate as well as generate enough profit to return to shareholders. This is really, really important because this is the key distinction between how a partner who owns like a law partner who owns a certain portion of a firm acts differently from a private equity firm. Private equity firm owns that company for a far shorter period of time than a partner who typically holds that position for maybe a few decades, right? And so oftentimes things like long-term growth outlook is something that a partner who owns a portion of that company cares far more about that equity that is worth in 10 or 20 years, as opposed to a private equity firm that only cares about how much that equity is worth in 3 to 5 years and how much they can sell that company, as well as meet their debt burdens in the short term. This is extremely, extremely important. But this changes how the firm operates and the sort of strategic direction that the firm operates in an extremely harmful way. I think firstly, what private equity firms do and what associates in private equity firms are incentivized to do is they try and lower costs initially so that they can be able to generate those favorable returns and show shareholders that they're generating good things. This looks like things like getting rid of extremely expensive senior employees or cutting things like employee headcounts in order to meet those cost demands. This also looks like things like cutting short-term or loss-making or less profitable departments within the firm, as well as increasing profitable departments within the firm. This looks like things like, for example, cutting out loss makers and that sort of thing. Notice on our side, this is far less likely to occur because when you are a managing partner of the firm and you have a certain stake and you're specializing in a certain part of law, it is extremely hard for other people to vote you out because you yourself also have a vote in the decisions the firm makes. So you're obviously going to vote in not firing yourself. Notice that private equity firms don't have to go to voting amongst all the partners. They can just fire who they like, which means they're able to cut out these departments, whereas on our side, it's much harder to cut them out because you have ownership partners who are able to protect and argue for themselves. Notice though, secondly, that what this leads to is therefore just lower quality legal work simply because they have smaller headcounts and fewer people to be able to do this work. But secondly, and really importantly, there's a huge amount of pro bono work that gets cut out. Why do law firms do pro bono work? It's a massive industry, but they say, oh, they do it out of kindness. I think it's far more than kindness. It's something that improves the prestige of your firm. But the way that it improves your prestige is something that occurs on the long term. So as a lawyer, I might take pro bono work like a couple of times every year. The vast majority of the pro bono work I take fails, right? It's usually a waste of time and something that doesn't actually do much for me. But oftentimes, secondly, pro bono work tends to require a huge number of trial and error and a huge time to actually be successful. This is like many appeals, many legal cases, because oftentimes you're breaking new ground in the legal world. What this means is that oftentimes the time horizon of doing pro bono work is far greater than 3 to 5 years that the private equity firm has. But secondly, oftentimes the benefits of pro bono work are not directly profit driven. That is extremely difficult to determine how much profit pro bono work actually generates. Usually pro bono work actually just generally improves the prestige of your firm. This is something that's much harder for private equity firms to actually see and materialize for themselves, but also something like prestige is something you build over decades. It's not something that you can really materialize in 3 to 5 years. But thirdly, and even more importantly, when I own a certain portion of the firm as a managing partner and I hold that position for 10, 20 years, notice that I'm far more incentivized to build up the prestige of the firm and take on free pro bono work. The moment I don't own any portion of the firm and it's all owned by the private equity firm, it makes no sense for me to give up my time and do pro bono work when it doesn't build up my own prestige, it doesn't build up my client base and my own name so that I'm able to generate more clients down the line because I've done so much successful pro bono work and I'm like at the top of my legal game, so more paying clients come to me. There's no incentive to do that because you don't make any money when the company grows because you don't own any shares in the law firm anymore. You don't manage that law firm. And so for these reasons, it's extremely unlikely for you to actually take pro bono work. I think there's a far more compelling reason why we have far less pro bono work than, for example, that lawyers do it out of the kindness of their heart or that they care about these things. This is the way that lawyers actually build up their clients in the first place. This is the way that they grow their equity. This is something that completely goes against anything that our private equity firms runs. Finally, I think that lawyers gain experience doing things like management, like building up clients, identifying gaps in the market, which means that when partners eventually leave these firms, they're able to successfully set up family practices that provide legal and specialized services to people who need them. We lose those individuals. We lose the really important training for them. For all those reasons, extremely, extremely proud to oppose.
And we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call government whip. Ooh.
Hi, can you see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, just a few seconds. I'm going to first reiterate Matt's extension and then explain why the rest of the debate is very unimportant in comparison. What was Matt's extension? It is that PE firms investing in law firms is uniquely good for the economy, and we proved all the necessary burdens for this argument to hold. It is robust to all of the challenges you get from opposition. First of all, we proved to you that law firms are particularly stable investments in all economic climates. Second of all, we told you that PE firms traditionally invested in tech, and therefore law is a new source of sort of diversification that they're able to opt into. Number three, we told you that PE firms gaining more capital is crucial for the market because, first of all, PE firms invest in a large number of companies, and therefore, when they have this additional source of stable income, you have more capital to prop up other companies you're investing in because you do not want them to fail and you want them to succeed to maximize your profits. Secondly, PE firms are also systematically important to the economy and ingrained as part of how the economy functions. So shareholders of PE firms often include institutional investors like sovereign funds, pension funds, and therefore at the point where PE firms often offer higher or more sustainable returns, you benefit all actors within the economy. What is the comparative? Profits generated by law firms, which go to individual partners on their side, often do not circulate within the economy. It was very unclear why on opposition, these law partners are able to make good investment decisions when they do not possess the expertise or incentives that PE firms do. Why would they not simply prioritize cashing out on their own, buying a mansion by the beach because of the glorification of wealth within this entire law industry over further developing the firm on our side of the house? What occurs on our side uniquely is that the pie, even within the law industry, keeps growing because PE firms have an incentive to reinvest the profits in order to make the company grow and enlarge their final profit. Whereas on their side of the house, you're up to the arbitrary whims of that particular law partner. Now, why is the rest of the debate unimportant? There are two major clashes here. First, on the quality of legal services. Firstly, CEO suggests that because you prioritize promises to shareholders as a PE firm, you pursue aggressive short-term growth strategies. I have three responses. Response number one, PEs are have relatively long-term investments as a matter of fact. They often have investments that do last 6 to 10 years. They're not venture capital firms and they're not hedge funds, right, who just speculate. So you often pursue a set of diversified strategies for investment, which just do not always include what they are talking about. Response number two, they also pursue various growth strategies. And this is the difference between a PE and the sort of McKinsey consultant firm that they want to talk about. Because McKinsey works for companies who aim to cut costs right now because they're economically failing and they want to improve on efficiency. So they're cutting headcount. But on our side, when a PE invests in a developing law firm, you prioritize expansion. You're in the phase of growing. You're in the phase of maximizing the number of consumers you have and the market share you're able to capture. So you have to expand the customer base and invest significantly within the firm. You have to actually increase the number of people working for a firm rather than cutting headcount on their side, because cutting headcount is not a way to make your firm expand or consolidate. The response number three, it is still comparatively better than the ownership of lawyers. First of all, they say that PE firms will fire senior employees. It's unclear why that's a bad thing if it opens up new positions for younger employees and it's more meritocratic and these senior employees are unproductive. Secondly, I have to emphasize that the incentive of the individual lawyer partner is highly arbitrary. It's unclear if they want to cash out in the short run, and there are a large set of shareholders on our side to keep these individuals who are in decision-making positions accountable. So if it is the case that they care about social justice, there's a substantial number of shareholders who are activists and do care about social justice, but on their side, nobody is able to influence the decision-making process of a single law partner. Now, opening opposition. opening opposition says the quality of law services decrease because there's less competition and there's worse management, and you don't take pro bono cases. Firstly, two responses. Number one, there's actually more competition because private equity firms do not consolidate the power of huge law firms right now. Their profit making comes from helping turn small startups into big law firms. And therefore they create more competition because they challenge the existing system of monopolization. Second response, you actually get better management on our side because you get professional managers who are better at handling things like interpersonal relations, things like evaluating employee performance, versus lawyers who have not undergone this training and do not possess this expertise. But finally, on weighing, this clash on justice is very marginal. 3 reasons. First reason is that even in their best case, law firms only offer services to upper middle class. So even if they do some pro bono cases, they are mostly tokenistic and for optics reasons. On both sides, they're profit-making machines. Number 2, poor individuals often are unable to access the services these law firms provide, right? The majority of them are easily manipulated, often have to resort to things like public defendants. Number 3, and this is the most crucial weighing mechanism. Even if, on their side, the price of these services decrease, still fighting legal battles are zero-sum, right? Like, even if there's a cheaper lawyer for a select number of individuals, rich people who fight lawsuits against these people still have access to more expensive and better lawyers. So it doesn't matter what the average price is, insofar as the richer person in a lawsuit is always able to get a better lawyer than a poorer person. So that inequality doesn't really matter in this round. Before I move on to the final clash on the quality of life of lawyers, which is also unimportant.
It's likely lawyers choose professional investment managers and the money doesn't change. Notice all CG reasons apply to dentists and car repair shops equally. They have no uniqueness in this debate.
Yeah, so your claim is that they have professional managers, but that's in terms of capability. But in terms of incentive, it's unclear if they want to keep expanding the law firm instead of just cashing out and buying a beach by the a mansion by the beach, right? On our side, you have constant expansion of the size of the pie, which actually benefits the economy and benefits the industry. Finally, on the quality of life for lawyers, O says you grant lawyers control over their lives. Obviously, they only can control their lives when they are lucky enough to make it as a partner. And this is a very small number of privileged people that we don't really care about. We would actually flip this to say that lawyers and law firms have worse qualities of life on their side because they face more exploitation, which is to say that lawyers who aspire to become partners on their side need to get a promotion. And therefore, they're expected to work for terribly long hours because employers force them to work hard. Because you could always say this boosts your chances of getting a promotion. If you're not working overtime today, then you're not getting the promotion. This is bad because this is why these lawyers sacrifice bonding with family and friends, sacrifice health, sacrifice personal interests, and become a shell of a man. And there's this irrational glorification of the perception that you can become a partner, which is precisely why these people are willing to be exploited for absolutely nothing. Their only response is lawyers have alternatives. But with the temptation of you becoming a partner and getting lots of wealth, these alternatives are much less glorified, which is why uniquely on their side, lawyers are more likely to opt into this exploitative structure, whereas on our side, there are fewer promotion opportunities to become partners, and therefore the exploitation is largely minimized. Fundamentally, the other two clashes in the round don't matter. We proved to you the largest impact, and that is why we win.
Yeah, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to sum up the entire debate, very proud to call opposition with.
I'm going to start by flipping the CG extension and then explaining why our case beats the top half. First, taking out closing government from the debate. Let's look at what their case tells us. Essentially, their case goes like this. These private equity firms invest in law firms, they make money, and then they have more money to invest into things like public services, like hospitals, police stations that private equity firms have become increasingly interested in. The problem with this argument is that they prove the capacity for these private equity firms to manage these companies and invest in them more, but they never engage in the debate about why these private equity firms will now manage those services well. And that's really important because if they don't prove that these new services now under the control of private equity firms produce good outcomes, then their case falls apart. So what I'm going to suggest here is why our mechanisms, which their case is contingent upon, explains why these services will be poorly run and worse for people on net in a world where private equity gains control. So why is that so? Because as we explained, private equity firms have short-term turnarounds of profit. Oftentimes, their individual consultants work on high interest rate deals, and they operate on a selling model which requires them to create high returns to profit. What am I going to show here? I'm going to show that this is horrible because it means that when private equity firms pick up these hospitals, the way that they resort to creating prices is by spiking up the prices of these services. They need to do layoffs in order to ensure that they have the highest profits, and they sell these companies off quickly, oftentimes leaving them unable to recuperate. So what responses do we get from this from the closing opposition whip to our material about why private equity companies are poorly run? They have 2 points of mitigation. They firstly say, well, sometimes private equity firms have long-term investments too. I have 4 responses. Firstly, even if they sometimes have long-term investments, we explain why they need to create short-term returns individually due to the structure of these companies themselves. That is because each deal manager within the company working on this operates within rigid hierarchies where they have to show returns. That is why they pursue the strategies that Amit explained. So even in the structure of long-term deals, short-termist strategies are pursued. Secondly, because oftentimes they operate on a selling model. And the reason for this is because private equity companies oftentimes contain huge amounts of debt. Why is this so? Because oftentimes a specialty of these vulture funds and private equity firms is purchasing companies that have high levels of debt or high levels of distressed debt, which means that they have a huge amount of their assets that are in the red that they need to correct for by generating fast and quick profits. Thirdly, because the private equity model itself gains its advantage by being dynamic and generating profit quickly. That is what differentiates private equity from pension funds and other stable funds, because they are able to buy up things quickly, generate supernormal profits, and then sell them off. That is why the very structure of private equity firms itself leads to these kinds of tactics. The second thing they say in response is that, well, you need to hire more workers in order to expand your firm. The problem here is that they conflate expansion with hiring more people. We explain why in the short term, oftentimes the most profitable route for these groups is to kill the departments that are not producing financing, right? So oftentimes they do this by raising up prices for goods that are inelastic, things like healthcare that people have to buy and still will buy, but now they're able to generate a supernormal profit for. How does this interact with closing government? It explains why their outcome is net bad, right? Because it points out why them investing in law firms, getting more money and investing in these services will lead to these services declining into the long term, meaning fewer people get access, meaning their impact gets flipped to the opposition side. The second response I make here is that to point out they explain, don't interrupt me, please, put it in the chat. Secondly, they do not explain at all why they will invest in these public services rather than in simply law or technology or far more stable assets if these are far more profitable as they explain. They never actually give you incentive for why there is a reason to invest in this. But finally, I'd point out that they can get this capital to invest in these services in other ways that do not require buying up law, for instance, investing in pension funds or commodity markets. These markets are equally as stable as law is, but the difference is that the effects on the market are far more diffuse. Now, you don't get our harms of reducing the quality of services, you don't get our harms of spiking up legal costs, but you do get the benefits that they suggest. So even in our worst case, we are able to get their benefit, but I think we also concretely flip it. So weigh this now against our certain impact. It means hundreds of cases cannot be taken. It means prices skyrocket for law services and people are less able to access care for a very uncertain benefit of maybe better services on their side that might actually be way, way worse. So closing government is concretely out of the debate. The next thing then that I'm going to look at is why we beat opening opposition, and I'm going to do this in detail. The main question that opening opposition does not answer is why is the profit incentive of private equity firms worse than the profit incentive of law firms traditionally managed? Because notice both have profit incentives. Both managing partners and private equity firms want to generate a profit. So the idea of a profit incentive isn't a sufficient mechanism. The key is how they seek to strategically generate that profit. And what we crucially explained is why private equity firms work on faster profit timelines. The reason for this is because they oftentimes have to extract short-term value and because they prioritize truncated deal timelines, as Ahmed explains, and I've just rebuilt. But moreover, we explain that internally, private equity consultants are beholden to pressure to perform on deals quickly, and oftentimes they operate on a selling model which requires them to purchase assets and then sell them off at new supernormal profits. What is the impact of this? It means that very quickly, budgets are diverted to quick, high-reward cases that decrease the amount of time and unneeded labor. This explains why they don't take the important risky cases, why they raise their prices overall, and why there are fewer pro bono cases. Let's see what mechanisms they give in addition. They say that mergers occur. There's 3 issues with this. First of all, they don't prove the scale on these mergers. Compare this to our mechanism, which operates just because of the management techniques of these companies in and of themselves in granular detail. Secondly, they don't explain why mergers themselves lead to long-term increase in prices. Perhaps that's true. Perhaps they lead to a reduction in prices. We explain why they spike prices because of these profit tactics. But thirdly, they do not explain why these mergers are exclusive to their side. As opening government points out, these mergers are already happening in the status quo. They don't explain why this is more probable or why this is the biggest impact on costs overall. They secondly say that lawyers are kind, and that's the only reason they give for why they would otherwise give pro bono cases. We give far stronger mechanisms. We explain why a huge amount of time is pushed onto super fast and profitable caseloads, and why entire pro bono departments and workforce sizes are cut down, meaning that the number of cases that can be taken reduces. This explains in the most comparative detail why the private equity model reduces the quality of services, unlocking opening opposition's impacts, which is far too generic currently, with simply mechanisms about the quality of services. I note that this clearly outweighs opening government, who barely has a case in the debate. They say that managing partners, essentially, there's going to be patronage and that they can't practice well. I first of all pointed out in a POI that they don't actually explain why this is true. Like, if they are good lawyers, they already practice on cases, or they outsource cases to younger people who are the most talented, because these law firms already have an existent profit incentive to produce the most good cases and the most good lawyers. So it's unclear why there would be such paternalism. And they don't explain why paternalism matters more than the wholesale macro effects on law as a profession in and of itself. So why do you vote for closing opposition today? Because we've proven that services get worse under the expansion of private equity models flipping CG, and actually prove the burden of why the quality of services decreases flipping GovBench. Thanks.
Yeah, thank the speaker for that speech, and thank you everyone for the debate. This is a close round, so I know, say your thank yous and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.